Symbols have been called the imaginative signposts of life. Since ancient times, symbols have defined civilizations, stirred rebellions, and tied people to tradition. Throughout the South, symbols of colonial America are still present, yet often hidden in plain sight. When someone does stumble upon these symbols, they may stir emotions or elicit a nostalgia for a bygone era that even that person does not understand. Someone looking at these windows into the past may simply see the symbolism as decoration or representing something other than its true meaning. There was a time, however, when these symbols were given a place of prominence and everyone knew exactly what these symbols meant. Although that time has passed, the symbols linger on. Perhaps no better place than Charleston, South Carolina and Savannah, Georgia exists to find these echoes of the past. Within these cities, no better place than churches exist to find these symbols from long ago. Both Charleston and Savannah are largely defined by their colonial experiences. During this time, both cities were ardently religious, with churches holding a prominent seat of importance. The churches employed symbolism to direct and instruct their congregations in matters of this world, remind them of the spiritual realm, and warn them about life after death. Many of these symbols were displayed atop steeples or over doorways, while others were more subtle and found amongst the gravestones surrounding the church. Today they stand as a testament to their beliefs and provide a glimpse into their lives. Nestled amongst the moss-covered trees just outside of Savannah, one can find Jerusalem Evangelical Lutheran Church. This church, located in the small town of Ebenezer, Georgia, boasts the title of oldest continuous worshiping Lutheran church in America. Founded by a small group of Salzburg immigrants searching for refuge from religious persecution, this church dates back to 1734 and is still attended by the descendants of those colonial immigrants. Visiting this place, one may become lost in its beauty and history, causing them to overlook the symbolism atop the steeple. High above the church, one can see a weather vane in the shape of a swan. In the middle of this seemingly unusual symbol, a hole left by a British musket ball can be seen. However, this is not why the symbol is important. Luther's swan, as the Salzburg descendants call it, is the symbol of the Georgia Salzburg Society and reminds the members of the church of their roots, their predecessors, and the persecution they suffered for their faith. The symbolism of the swan dates back to the 15th century and the early reformer John Huss. When asked about the swan's symbolism, the Salzburgers at Jerusalem Church eagerly tell the story of how John Huss's last name greatly resembled and sounded much like the Czech word for goose. At the end of his life, Huss was condemned as a heretic and sentenced to burn at the stake. The Salzburgers hold to the legend that as the fire was lit, Huss stated, "This day you burn a goose, but after me will come a swan, and him you will not burn." However, until 102 years later, this swan did not come. Finally, although perhaps not immediately recognized, the swan that Huss spoke of emerged in 1517 when a young monk wrote his 95 Theses. Martin Luther's coat of arms displayed a swan which symbolized purity. This was a fitting symbol for someone attempting to purify the church. As Luther's followers spread out preaching his message, many displayed his coat of arms and the swan. When these followers reached Bohemia, where Huss's followers had been persecuted, they recognized the symbol and viewed Luther as the swan Huss had spoken of so long ago. In honor of the founder of the Lutheran denomination and the Salzburgers who were not able to escape persecution, the Georgia Salzburger Society adopted the swan as their symbol. Today, the old metal swan turning in the wind above the church reminds the congregation of their roots, the same as it did for their colonial ancestors. Roughly 100 miles northeast of Jerusalem Church, another church all but forgotten amongst the bustle of a city is also adorned with a symbol of a bird. This church, St. James, is located just outside of Charleston in the small town of Goose Creek. This church was built by Barbadian settlers between 1713 and 1719 and boasts the distinction of being one of the oldest Episcopal churches in the United States. Like Jerusalem Church, St. James has a rich colonial history. Within the graveyard surrounding the church, one can find the graves of prominent politicians, some of the famed Goose Creek men, and the possible burial site of the famous patriot Colonel William Moultrie. However, the symbolism of the bird is found not in the graveyard, but above the front doors of the church. Just above this door is a large molding of a mother pelican feeding her 3 offspring. Upon seeing this, one may be left confused or perhaps believing that this is simply a fitting decoration due to the abounding number of pelicans found in South Carolina's low country. However, this symbol was once recognized for its deeper meaning by everyone who walked through the doors. The symbol of the pelican dates back to antiquity and has long symbolized sacrifice. The origin of this symbol is contained within an ancient legend which states that during a time of famine, a mother pelican, not being able to find food for her young, was seen striking herself with her beak, causing herself to bleed. The mother pelican used her blood to feed and save her starving young. However, in doing so, the mother pelican eventually died, giving her own life for her young. Long ago, Christians recognized the similarities in this story with Christ's sacrifice for believers and incorporated the pelican into Christian symbolism. Although today few people and even Christians likely do not recognize this symbolism, the colonial members of St. James were reminded of Christ's sacrifice each time they passed under the symbol of the pelican. While the symbolism of the pelican reminded the colonial churchgoers of Christ's atonement for their sins and the lighter side of the spiritual realm, another symbol at St. James, as well as many other colonial churches, reminded congregations of the darker side of the spiritual realm. However, those living in the early to mid-18th century needed little reminding of the presence of evil. During this time, most people believed and acknowledged that Satan and his demons freely roamed the earth. In addition to these evil spirits found within their own religion, many colonials also believed in the forces of evil from African religions, such as witches and ghosts. To guard against these forces of evil, the architecture of many churches incorporated moldings of cherubs above the exteriors of their windows. Above the exterior of each window at St. James, a single cherub looked down from above. These angelic ornaments may be mistaken as simple religious decoration today. However, during the 18th century, these cherubs served 2 distinct purposes. At a basic visual level, these cherubs were a visual reminder of the spiritual realm. Beyond this basic purpose, the cherubs were incorporated into the church's architecture to keep evil spirits from entering the church. Although this type of protective symbolism was used throughout Europe, it was particularly prevalent in African cultures. Although the African slaves used other symbols, it is likely that the Barbadians who founded St. James were influenced by slaves, which possibly caused them to incorporate these symbols into their church. While cherubs were particularly used above the exteriors of the windows, they could also be found inside the churches such as St. Philip's and nearby Charleston. While symbols of cherubs within churches served different purposes than those on the exterior, their symbolism was similar. In addition to protecting against evil spirits within the church, these cherubs symbolize the presence of God and the forces of good within the church. However, throughout the 18th century, the importance of these spiritual symbols became diminished. With the Enlightenment came the rise of science and reason and the downfall of superstition. Additionally, the more tangible threat of slave revolts increased, causing men to change their idea of protection to guns within the church. Preachers also began to preach less about the spiritual realm. Although the cherubs remain at St. James and St. Philip's, many cherubs and other spiritual symbols were removed during the late 18th century. However, for a time, these symbols reminded congregations of the spiritual world around them and gave them a peace of mind within the church. While spirituality and unseen forces were ever present in the minds of those living in the early to mid-18th century, another form of spirituality was also given much thought during this time. Walking through the graveyards of the St. Philip, St. Michael's, or even the shadows of the ruins of St. George, one becomes aware of the importance of the concept of death held during this time period. A visitor to these colonial resting places will also notice a common symbol on many graves, which serves several purposes the colonials would have been very aware of. Appearing on many of the slate graves in these graveyards is the simple etching of a skull with wings behind it. The first purpose of this symbol drew mostly upon the skull. This common symbol of death reiterated the idea preached from the pulpit that death was inescapable due to man's sinful nature. In addition to this grim symbolism, the winged skull also gave hope to those who viewed it. The wings incorporated with the skull represented the immortal soul rising from the deceased and going to heaven. This symbolism offered the family and friends of the deceased comfort in knowing that their loved one was with God and that they would see them again. However, this symbol also warned the viewer of the alternative to eternal life through faith in Christ. The ominous symbol of the skull reminded the viewer of the eternal damnation that awaited the living who rejected Christ. While this symbol was the most common, many headstones incorporated geometrical symbolism, which was more difficult to recognize. The most common geometric symbols incorporated in headstones were the rectangle and the semicircle. The rectangle symbolized the things of earth and the life of the deceased. The rectangle was used for this purpose because it shared the number of sides it contained with the number of directions on the compass and humors in the body. However, the more recognizable geometric symbol was the semicircle atop so many colonial graves. This shape represented the firmament the soul must push through in the invisible things of God while also pointing towards heaven. Although this symbol is not recognized by many today, those living in the colonial South would have easily recognized these symbols and used them in places other than the graveyard. Perhaps the best example of these geometric symbols can be seen in one of Charleston's icons, St. Philip's. Although the first two buildings of this church no longer stand, the building that stands today still incorporates many of the geometrical symbols used in the colonial buildings. Like the steeple that reaches towards the heavens today, the second building could be easily seen throughout the city, and its shape symbolized both life on earth and the spiritual realm of God. Much like the rectangle and semicircle used in the headstones, the colonial St. Philip's used a rectangular base and a barrel-vaulted ceiling. The rectangular base symbolized the earth, and the arched ceiling symbolized the heavens and acted as a lens to the invisible things of God. Unlike these symbols used in headstones to symbolize the gate between earth and heaven, which led to the afterlife, these same symbols represented the gate between earth and heaven where people could be closer to God. Even within the building that stands today, these symbols can be seen. The sanctuary and base of the church are rectangular, with rectangular booths around the pews. The ceiling of the church is arched, and the front of the sanctuary rises in an impressive arch. While these symbols have long been a part of St. Philip's, many churches throughout the colonial South incorporated these symbols to remind their congregations of the presence of God within the church. While many other colonial religious symbols exist, these few provide a window into the lives of those living and worshiping in the colonial South. They allow one to get a glimpse into the minds of these colonists and see what they believed and thought was important. Whether they used them to remember their heritage or used them to remind them of things not seen, these symbols played a large role in the colonial Southerners' lives. These symbols not only express the colonists' values to others living at their time, but also stand as a testament to those values for all who see them today, if only they take the time to understand their deeper meaning.